Welcome to the CFE Media and Technology Education Session, The Future of Manufacturing, How Industries Are Adapting in 2021. I'm your moderator, Mark T. Hosky with CFE Media and Technology. In keeping with our CEP policy, please take some time to read the quality assurance slide. This session is designed for technicians and engineers who want to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected manufacturing, including challenges and opportunities. Here is a list of the learning objectives. We'll touch on these today in today's presentation. Additional resources can be viewed and downloaded on the left side of the screen below the session's agenda. For a seamless online experience, here are some tips. Additional resources can be viewed and downloaded on the left side of the screen below the session's agenda. If you'd like to take notes within the session, click on the left panel labeled Notes to do so. The session is available on demand if you need to come back at any time. Please remember that the session will be made live at noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, with the Q&A starting around 12:45 p.m. Central, 1:45 Eastern, or immediately after the presentation ends if it runs a little longer than 45 minutes. Industry experts will answer the viewer questions live, and those answers will be archived with the session. You can see the Q&A details in the Meeting tab on the left side of the screen. Here's some information about obtaining an approved PDH for today's session. Today's speakers are Art Whitman, Content Director, Oracle NetSuite, and Gavin Davidson is Product Manager at Oracle NetSuite. I'm your moderator, Mark T. Hosky, Content Manager, CFE Media and Technology. Now a little more about each speaker. Art Whitman is editor of NetSuite's Brainerd. He previously led content strategy across a major U.S. publishing company's technology brands, covering tech topics such as channel partners, data centers, containers, information technology, Internet of Things, and network computing. Whitman has a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical and Electronics Engineering and a Master's degree in Manufacturing Systems Engineering from University of Wisconsin-Madison. With more than 10 years at NetSuite, Gavin Davidson is an industry product manager for manufacturing and distribution. In this role, he helps drive new functionality in the NetSuite product roadmap and communicates this to the market, customer, prospects, partners, and employees. He also has served as a solution consultant and vertical market expert in his time at NetSuite. Davidson has served in consulting and sales roles for manufacturing technology, including visual manufacturing and Epicor Advantage for companies ranging from Exprologic to Second Foundation to 6S Partners. Gavin has a higher national certificate in product engineering from Stowe College in Glasgow, Scotland. Please enjoy the presentation, note any questions you have along the way, and then join us for a question and answer session after the presentation. The Q&A details are in the Meetings tab on the left side of your screen. Now for a short commercial, and then on to the presentations.
If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. I learned this the hard way with my first company, so I created NetSuite, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make smart decisions and grow with confidence. That's why companies who use NetSuite grow 3 times faster than the S&P 500.
Schedule your free product tour right now at netsuite.com/grow.
Thanks, Mark. We're going to be looking at 2 surveys today that were done on NetSuite's behalf by Thomas for Industries. Thomas for Industries is a manufacturing and other industry media property that has a good audience, particularly in the small to medium manufacturers. The first survey was done about a year ago, and you probably have never heard of it because we were analyzing the data just as the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. So the data was actually not all that useful. It is useful now as a comparison point as we move forward. Okay, here's a look at today's agenda, and I believe you just saw it on Mark's previous slides. We'll be looking at the COVID-19 pandemic and how it affected manufacturers, learn how the changes affect the industry in 2021, and discover how customers are changing their approach to business based on that. So as I mentioned, there's two surveys. The first survey was done in the first quarter of 2020. It was actually done in January. And it had 116 responses of the titles that we were looking for. So the titles we were looking for were all VP, manager, director, or above, all the way up to owner president. At that time, about 25% of the respondents were under $2 million in revenue. We repeated the survey, although not exactly. So a number of the questions were changed when we repeated the survey in December of this year. Because of the way we changed the questions, some of the data is not exactly trendable, and it's also not trendable because there were significantly more small companies under $2 million in revenue. However, you'll see a lot of trends that I think are important to note, and we'll talk about those as we go through. Okay, we'll start with business impacts. We have, I believe, 7 sections to this. This is the first. These are high-level overviews of some of the trends we found in our data. As you see, 87% of markets were disrupted by COVID-19. A number of them had supply chain issues, a little over half. And of those who had supply chain issues, about half of them now plan to reshore their supply chains. Gavin, does any of that surprise you?
Yeah, I think based on what we know and have learned, I actually think 53% might be a little low. So I guess it depends where you are in the supply chain and what the disruptions were. And then the only other thing I comment on here is that reshoring or nearshoring might not always be the actual solution. I think the point here is to have a little bit more diversity in your supply chain, and to make sure that you have options when it comes if things do go wrong in the future. So I think it's not always the reshoring or nearshoring, because there for sure can be a cost element to that as well still at times.
Right. And we'll talk more about each of these issues as we go further into the slides. Okay, COVID caused key market disruptions for about 87% of the respondents. In general manufacturing and consumer product packaged goods, it's about the same, a little over 90%. We also broke out the manufacturers by those who serve the medical profession. And for those, for obvious reasons, there was less disruption in their business, although I think there may have been some disruption in how they did their business. Do you agree, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's disruption can be good and bad. I mean, if you're suddenly selling twice as much product as you thought you were to different locations, then it's still a disruption and might still have a negative impact in some other part of your business. And if you're bringing on extra labor to make new product, then they might not be as efficient, and that may impact your margins, etc. as well. So I'm sure it wasn't all rosy for the medical device or medical suppliers as well.
So prior to the pandemic, one of the things that we saw across all industries, including manufacturing, was that the low unemployment in the U.S. Was a serious concern, including at that point some upward pressure on wages and a lot of concerns for skills gaps. So that is essentially the data we're looking at here. As you can see, the skills gap was a major concern for manufacturers, a little over half of them concerned about it. And we'll come back to the skills for a little bit later. Efficiency expectations. Here we see that the biggest issue that was of concern in the outset of 2020 was insufficient production capacity, followed by a lack of technical innovation and back office concerns. Interestingly enough, all of these were kind of equally concerning within probably the accuracy of the survey at the time, with about 5 to 10% very concerned about it having a big negative impact, and about 30% having a slight impact. Gavin, what do you see in this data?
Sure. So when you're on one hand, your back office system is a constraint, but then they also have a lack of technological innovation. So perhaps there's something going on there. Having a system in place, but maybe having the right system in place. But the other thing is, back when I was consulting, if I got to a company that had a cost accountant, for example, would be a little bit more thought to have a little bit better idea of how their business was actually running, because there's somebody looking at the numbers and trying to understand them in different ways. And I think maybe today the equivalent to that would be almost like a data scientist, or someone that whose job is dedicated to understanding the numbers behind the business. And so maybe there's some things there that we can learn from. And before you change your back office system necessarily, maybe it's understanding the data that you have, because all systems generate vast amounts of information. And I think we'll need to spend a little bit more time to try and understand what that information is telling us.
Okay, COVID's global impact. Not surprisingly, the major issue here was disruption of key markets, which was almost universally seen, followed by supply chain disruptions and trade uncertainties, including tariffs, and economic damage in overseas markets. Those were the primary ones. Gavin, what do you see in terms of this data? Does anything surprise you here?
The mention of the US dollar is kind of interesting. If you're looking to work internationally, then hopefully you have your company set up with different subsidiaries globally that might be working in different currencies. And so if you have that set up the right way, you might actually be able to take advantage of weakness in different currencies at different times of the year. So that might be something to look at as well.
COVID's business impact. Yeah, not too surprising. Cash flow is the number one issue for manufacturers, followed by staffing and again supply chain. About a third saw effects their operating hours and product and service offerings. Some products obviously didn't work so well over the previous 6 months, but certainly it's not too big of a surprise that cash flow is an issue here. Gavin, do you see that's persisting?
Exactly. And when there's staffing issues, again, there's training, there's an onboarding process that might impact your profitability and all those things, and supply chain disruptions and longer operating hours, which might result in overtime, that sort of thing. Clearly all those things are going to have impacts on cash flow.
Okay, looking forward, actually the list doesn't change all that much. The primary concern is still for disruptions in key markets, supply chain issues, and again, some issues that relate to uncertainties in things like tariffs. As a result of the election, there may be less tariffs going on, but I think that there probably are still some concerns for trade with China in the East, Gavin.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think everyone's a lot more optimistic, you could say, now about the future. But there's clearly a long way to go in specifically China relationships, and you're seeing in the news with some other issues that are going on outside of Hong Kong, etc. as well. So I think it's going to be a little while before the whole tariff situation settles down, if it ever does. I think it's just a new norm, right? It's something that we're going to have to expect and learn how to deal with.
So looking forward, the impacts on manufacturing also don't look all that much different, with the cash flow still being concerned for 64%, supply chains about half, and staffing about 2/5. I'm wondering if you see these as being, we asked about impacts, but I guess some of these impacts could be positive as opposed to negative.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I think if you know, if you're working longer hours and maybe you're offering more services, then it's sure in the short term it might be a bit of a cash flow crunch. But you're hopefully you're setting yourself up for long term success. I think you know, it's to go back to, you know, the idea of planning and having, you know, having a plan for the year and doing like quarterly detailed reviews of where you are. And I read something the other week, or listened to something for they were talking about companies having on Fridays setting aside a couple of hours to talk about the things that didn't work in the last week. And so I think if you start looking at some of those very tactical things, and you know, not only just celebrating the successes, but having time dedicated as a company or leaders within the company to say, you know, what were the issues over the last couple of weeks? How can we resolve them going forward? And those things will all bubble up over time to eventually impact cash flow and potentially supply chain disruptions as well. So I think there's always some tactical level things that might have a bigger impact on the company.
Yeah, I feel like you know, finance groups probably are continuing to do their scenario planning and looking at contingency plans, and it probably happens across operations as well. So I feel like that process needs to continue.
And there's a lot of talk about diversity these days. And you know, there's a lot of diversity within manufacturing companies as well. I mean, your engineers, designers are used to have a different mindset. Maybe they look at things from a different point of view than some other people in your business do. And so I think including more people from different parts of the company when you're brainstorming and troubleshooting and that sort of thing can probably only be a good thing.
Okay, so that's the overview of business effects. We'll now dive into each of these areas by themselves. So here are some top manufacturing priorities we discovered in the poll. So looking at 2020 from last year, the top two goals, pretty much tied, were to constrain costs and improve efficiencies. It's interesting that, you know, those are pretty good economic times back in January of last year. We'd take them now if we could, but a lot of companies were still looking at cost efficiencies. And I think, interestingly enough, marketing comes up as number 3. I'm not sure I would have expected that.
No, I mean, I guess it depends what type of manufacturer you are, but yeah, a lot of the companies I worked with in the past, their idea of marketing was basically answering the telephone when it rang. So I'm surprised that, I guess, pleasantly surprised that was third. But also you've got like launch new products and services. I mean, those marketing and launching new products hopefully are you know, there's some discussion there to make sure that you're launching the right product for the market.
Okay, let's look at list of planned business actions. Again, this is from last January's point of view. Updating production lines and equipment, I think, is sort of a never-ending task for most manufacturers. Mm-hmm. Expand the sales team, expand product distribution, enter new sales channels. Sort of speaks to that marketing emphasis. It looks like a lot of businesses at that time were really looking to add some new business and looking at ways to do it. The thing they weren't looking at was improving their data collection. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again, to go back to tactical level things that you can do, and to go back to my previous comment about cost accounting and data analysis and that sort of thing. I mean, one of the first things you can do is make sure that you're getting more accurate and timely information from production. So you know, that could be some improved data collection is I guess it's probably targeted at gathering it from employees. But the first thing to do is understand the equipment that you have, and understand what sort of information is available to gain from it currently, and maybe look at that information first, and figure out where the gaps are in the information that you're getting before going and investing in additional equipment. Let's just make sure that the information that you want is what you're going to get from the equipment that you invest in.
So let's take a look at the top 5 business goals now. Expand marketing efforts is number 1, and that actually comports with our more general data for cross businesses. Marketing and sales, customer acquisition is a number 1 across all of the sectors that we're looking at. Expand the sales channel, again, that too is very high on the list. Controlling cash flow here at number 3. It's a little bit higher for manufacturers than it is for businesses in general that we've surveyed.
Sure.
And of course, control costs. It was number 1, and now it's down to number 4. Gavin, what does that tell you?
Yeah, I mean, the only worrying thing here is, but marketing costs money usually, and expanding sales channels is the same thing. So, what number 1 and 2 almost are the opposite of 3 and 4. Maybe the comment here is they're going to control the marketing efforts were within their cost constraints, and within maybe cash flow is going to impact it, because it certainly looks like that might be an issue.
Yeah, when we talk to CFOs in the broader market, the predominant feeling was they'd cut as much as they could in 2020, and now it was time to expand efforts and to get back to trying to get into growth mode. So I don't know if we're seeing the same thing here, but I see your point. Those look like those 1 and 2 are in conflict with 3 and 4 to a certain degree. Okay, so let's look at how they're doing on those marketing efforts. So here's their existing marketing strategies as reported by the current survey. So word of mouth advertising, as Gavin said, answer the phone. That's a good one. But I think what's really interesting here is that the next 4 are all either digital or social efforts. And I think that's a really interesting phenomenon, that's how folks are going to marketing. It's smart. And I think it speaks to Gavin's concern about cost, because although nothing in marketing is free ever, these are ones that you can control costs sometimes better than you could, say, with print advertising or other efforts. What do you see in this, Gavin?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen in the past is, anyone who's been to like a machine shop or any sort of manufacturing company like that, the lobby is usually full of trade publications. So I'm not sure where those fall into here, but you got to think that the landscape of print advertising and advertising in general is changing. And perhaps I'm also surprised that a customer referral program being only 26% is maybe a little low. We rely heavily on those types of activities, and I think using the good feedback you're getting from the existing customers is always a good way to go.
Yeah. One thing I'll say about the social and digital efforts, they do take a unique skill set, and for manufacturing leaders who are unsure of that skill set, it's a really good place to go out and get some help from consultants. And they're often not all that expensive in this space. So particularly if you don't feel confident in it, it's a good place to look for some help.
And sure, and to go back to the comment earlier about diversity, including other parts of the business. I mean, there's blogging at 17%. You probably have somebody in your company who's a very creative writer that you don't know about, and who would love to get involved in writing blogs and talking about what they do in the company, or experiences they've had, or whatever, and that could be a good source of content as well.
Okay, in terms of how they'll expand those marketing efforts, we asked it's basically the same question, but in a slightly different way. Over half are looking to add new marketing strategies to their existing approach. 50% are looking to improve their customer-facing digital systems, which we take to mean mostly their social presence and their websites. Only a little over a third are planning to spend more on their current marketing strategy. So it does seem like they're thinking differently about how to go at it. And there's a brave 20% that are starting marketing for the first time. What do you think of that, Kevin?
Yeah, I think, one of the things with manufacturers is they've always been good at creating in different ways and adjusting their products, for based on customer needs. So maybe they need to apply some of that to the way that they go about marketing. And to your earlier point, it's never too late to go and look for some industry expertise if you need help in marketing in particular. It's definitely an art form of its own in many ways, and probably needs to be tailored to your specific business, I would say.
Okay, let's take a look at the cash flow issues. So we've had the marketing side where we're planning on spending more money. Let's see how we're going to save some. So in terms of looking backwards, manufacturers experiencing cash flow issues, it's a little over 2/3 of all respondents had those issues. A little bit more in general manufacturing and significantly less in medical for, I guess, obvious reasons. Do you think this, are these numbers big enough that it makes the marketing effort seem like it might not happen?
I think it might do, or maybe it happens in a less something in a way that costs less to do. I mean, there's when we're going back to the old days of the guerrilla marketing books and that sort of thing that were very much based on do-it-yourself marketing, right? So I think marketing is always a good thing. There's got to be ways to do it a little bit more cost effectively, and it might be as simple as making sure that your website's up to date and you're getting your SEO is relevant and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the one that I wish we'd asked more about that we didn't, because when we put this together, we weren't thinking about getting back to more normal times. But I think some of the marketing efforts may take on a face-to-face approach, either at trade shows or just like open houses and things like that around your own area. So some of those are pretty cost-effective ways of getting at it too, I think.
And if when we actually get back to in-person trade shows, or maybe it's virtual trade shows, right?
Yeah. So in theory, face-to-face ones in the fall, because I've seen them starting to pop up and be scheduled, but certainly until then, the virtual ones are there. So the impacts on cash flow, luckily, orders being canceled is only occurring at about a quarter of the respondents, but about half are seeing that their sales were reduced or slowed, orders are postponed or delayed, and another quarter are seeing that their customers are having a tough time paying. Interestingly, only 20% took PPP loans, and the numbers for taking private loans, starting new income streams are also low. So I guess there's a couple ways you could view this, particularly on the PPP side. Either there was some disqualifying factor that led fewer of the manufacturers to be able to take those loans, or they may actually have not been, although they had cash flow issues, they weren't existential cash flow issues to the point where they had to really take drastic actions. Is that how you read this?
Yeah, I think this tells us that going into the pandemic, manufacturers were actually in a pretty decent position, and maybe had learned from previous, not pandemics, but other downturns in the industry and that sort of thing, and maybe they were a little bit more prepared and had some decent cash reserves.
Yeah, I guess manufacturers have been no strangers to the occasional cash flow issue.
No.
Okay, so let's look at techniques for improving cash flow in 2021. Um, Obviously, one of the better things you can do is reduce the number of delayed or postponed canceled orders. Um, we've done a little bit of work in how people can go about reducing the delays. And there's actually a lot of really simple things that you can do that require almost no money at all. For example, if invoices show the company's logo of all things, they're more likely to pay that invoice than if their logo doesn't appear on it. So a little bit of study on just the ways to reduce the day sales outstanding, I think, is worth it, because there's some really simple things that can be done there. Operating closer to full capacity more often, and
Yeah,
taking out
that's
credit lines is down there. But what do you think about the capacity issue?
yeah. I mean, that could be a slippery slope, can't it? I mean, going back to the goal, etc. You know, you operating at full capacity and driving down efficiency isn't always a good thing. Um, and and maybe there's the opportunity to for companies that have larger facilities, maybe they can sublet some to other some of the buildings, etc. I've some personal experience with people doing that quite successfully. So that maybe they have excess warehouse space, that sort of thing, that they can lease out for additional income. So yeah, the whole full capacity thing scares me because of just chasing optimal efficiency isn't always the best way forward.
Yeah. So what about the flip side of that? Let's say manufacturers are delighted to see there's all kinds of demand beyond what they can handle. You see contract manufacturers as being
Yeah,
the way to handle that?
at times for sure. It's not just a direct cost thing. It can be it could be positioning contract manufacturers in a certain part of the world to support the supply chain at certain times. It might be something to look at as well.
Okay. All right, let's move on and look at some of the issues around staffing. Uh, so last spring, we found that about 20% of respondents had concerns about staffing and skills. Sort of perplexing or unexpectedly, now 35% of all respondents are having concerns for staffing. You'd think with high unemployment, maybe that wouldn't be the case.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess there were some, I'm sure, well, I don't guess, I'm sure there were some layoffs that occurred that now have to be turned back around. And certainly the unemployment rate doesn't have much to do with the skills issues, does it?
No, and the the medical sector as well, of course, that might require a little bit more specialized training depending on what it is that you're doing, and and operating in a clean room environment, that sort of thing. I'm sure the onboarding process there takes a little longer, which would definitely potentially cause some issues.
So let's take a quick look at the changes in the skills gap plan here. Last January, the goal was to retrain existing workers,
Mm-hmm.
do extensive training on new hires, and recruit from local trade schools, community colleges. Now the goals are slightly different. There is that view to increase the total number of employees, which I think is getting back people who probably had to be laid off during the course of the last year. And then again, to add staff with more specific skills. What do you make of it, Gavin?
Yeah, I think I like the retraining employees. I mean, I think that improves. Employees like being trained. they like to know that they're doing a good job, right? So, and so if you can cross train employees, it gives you more flexibility as a business, and it improves the employee satisfaction as well. So, and gives you a little bit more flexibility for the future. So. And hopefully the retraining ties in with the improved training, and then that will reduce some of the other needs for increasing total employees, or you can bring in new hires. You can bring them into jobs that are more easily trained, or maybe lower level jobs.
Yeah, I think even if you even with that new training comes a little bit of a salary increase, which is a good thing for the employee too. That cost generally is a lot lower than bringing on new staff and having to train them from scratch. And so how are manufacturers actually addressing the skills gap? Yep, they're retraining existing workers and doing extensive training for new hires. That's what we saw from the previous slide. They're also doing some other things, including modernizing their facilities, which in theory should make it easier for, I think it's younger workers who may be more interested in technical solutions, in other words, systems that have digital sides to them. Apprenticeship programs are still around and kicking and probably will increase over the next few years. And a few brave souls out there said they don't have a skills gap problem.
Or they don't realize they do.
Maybe they don't realize they do. And so addressing it now, it's retraining existing workers in sense of training for hires. This is pretty much a repeat of the slide. What do you think of the modernizing? How does that affect the workforce?
Yeah, I would look at this whole thing in general as, that the skills gap is an ongoing problem, and so I would try and break it down into short-term actions, medium-term actions, and then long-term actions as well. So, bringing on an apprenticeship program would probably be a longer-term thing. And working with local trade schools. When I did my apprenticeship in Scotland, the first year we actually did at a dedicated training facility because it saved the company's money from running their own apprenticeship program. And then the following, the last 3-4 years were at the company itself. So there's definitely a cost to that, but it's worth it. So I think those are long-term things that you need to invest in. In the medium term, maybe it's training for new hires and maybe recruiting, having an ongoing program to try look out for opportunities to recruit from competitors. And then in the short term, you can retrain, you can modernize your facility, etc. as well. So I would try and look at it from a near term, medium term, long term point of view, and make sure that you have each area covered appropriately.
We asked the question in a more general way, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but instead of phrasing the question as about skills gap, we just asked it in terms of improving staffing. And we pretty much saw the same thing, same responses came up. So whether it's specifically a matter of skills or just improving your staffing, the same techniques are pretty much being deployed here. In terms of manufacturers' desired skills and new workers, almost by 2-to-1 margin, skilled workers like machinists and mechanics are who is in demand, as opposed to credentialed and degreed engineers or unskilled or semi-skilled workers. And this we saw prior to the pandemic too, Gavin. So this is not really a surprise, is it?
No, I actually did. When I was an apprentice, I learned how to program CNC machines and all that sort of thing. So I'm actually planning on that for my retirement to go back to that, because the number of times I've mentioned that I can program CNC machines with NetSuite to customers, etc., and prospects, and they always told me that I could go and work there if I wanted to afterwards. So maybe I'll go back to that in my later years.
Yeah, we see it a lot here in non-manufacturing areas too. Car dealerships right now are paying 6-figure salaries to mechanics as long as they're certified by the manufacturer. Because without those certified mechanics, you can't do work on cars under warranty. So
Right.
They're in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
If I had a kid right now, I think I might tell him to at least consider it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a look at supply chains. sort of a flip here. The medical folks saw the biggest issue in getting enough materials to make what they needed to make.
Yeah.
Not too surprising, I think. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that and look at the sorts of materials that they had trouble getting. Component sourcing, the most difficult. Gavin, I'm going to take a sort of a naive shot at this. I'm guessing that if you have component sourcing, it's harder to have multiple sources, or it was less likely that folks did, just because you had to specify what that component was. So it's not like a raw material where you get it from multiple sources. Is that what the issue that's going on here, or is it something else?
It could be. I mean, but even with components, sometimes there's equivalence. It's oftentimes in the supply chain, you'll source components yourself and then position them at your suppliers. So that can be a way around it as well. But the other thing is, I mean, a lot of products need both components and raw materials. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're it's one or the other. So does that mean that it's almost 60% actually had, or over 60% have supply chain issues? So
yeah, I'm sure in some cases they're additive rather than one or the other.
Yeah, I think it's more. I think the components versus raw materials depends what it is you're making, really, and so they could almost be considered to be the same thing.
We talked a little bit about reshoring. I'm not sure there's a heck of a lot more to say, except that, of course, some things you can reshore and some things you just can't.
Right.
If you need lithium for batteries, you're going to buy it from Australia and so on. So, but it seems like it's an interesting thing to pursue, and where it's possible, I'm sure folks are going to do it. Some key metrics here. And for these, we're essentially looking at the data that's available to manufacturers and how they're using it. We'll start out by looking at what was available last year. So this is from the earlier survey we did. Sales data, historical customer histories, cost of goods sold are the three biggies, followed by gross revenue and gross margins. And then some competitive intelligence, inventory turnover rates, customer support inquiries, and material loss rates kind of towards the bottom of this. As it turns out, a lot of the decisions were also made based on those top threes in terms of how business leaders guided their business. So let's take a look at how that's changed now. And what we'll see is it hasn't changed a heck of a lot. It's still sales volumes, cost of good, right, and customer order history that are the top three, with gross revenue following close behind, as well as I think the new ones that we added to this list probably would have prepped up the other list before, current accounts payable and receivable. Does this surprise you all, Gavin?
No, I think the one I'm actually quite happy to see there is the customer support inquiries. I mean, those are often valuable pieces of information that tell you how your product's doing and how it's being perceived by the customer base, and that can directly lead to, there's all this talk of marketing efforts. A lot of the times you're looking at the support inquiries can lead you to new products or to understand how they're being used, for example. And what about machine integration? We're talking about tracking cost of goods sold and costing, etc. as well. Then there's definitely a case for improved data collection and machine integration potentially to get the information in a more timely manner.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree this speaks to the number of small manufacturers we had in our survey. Mm-hmm. Certainly the bigger guys are going to be looking really closely at inventory turnover and some of those sorts of things. And it's probably more difficult, or in some of the smaller manufacturers' cases, they can see by intuition what a big manufacturer couldn't, or at least that's what they've been doing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, the small manufacturers and big manufacturers do exactly the same thing, or mostly the same thing, just that the smaller guys have fewer people to do it. So they almost need more automation than the bigger guys do.
Yeah. Okay, in terms of how those KPIs are used for business decisions, we asked basically the same list. And what you'll see here is that the order is about the same, but each one of these are about 20% less than what we saw on the other slide. So in other words, about 20% of businesses aren't using each of these pieces of data that they actually have.
Right.
And that surprised me a little bit. What do you make of that?
No, that doesn't surprise me at all, because it's like I've done other surveys in the past where, again, to go back, that's partly where my data scientist comment before came from, where we've discovered that the company said that they knew that they had the system, they didn't think the system was giving the information they need, but at the same time they didn't understand how to analyze the information they were getting. So, again, it goes back to the previous comment. That's understand the information is available to you, analyze it as much as you can, and then make a determination if you need more or different information, and how you're going to analyze it and review it in a meaningful and consistent way going forward, I guess I would say.
Yeah, that's kind of the magic, isn't it? Is finding the ability to get those numbers, know they're right, know what action should be taken, while also doing everything else you're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So with that last bit of sage information, we're going to wrap up our presentation here, and I'm going to turn it back to Mark for a couple more comments.
Art, Gavin, great presentation. Thanks for sharing the research. Now it's time for the question and answer portion. Please submit your questions using the Zoom question and answer interface.